It gives me immense pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Miller, eminent professor of archaeology in the Department of Archaeology at the University of Sydney. She specializes in archaeology and material culture of the ancient Mediterranean world, with particular emphasis on the cultural relations between Greece, Anatolia, and the ancient Near East, especially the Persian Empire in the first millennium before the Common Era. Professor Miller is also co-director, I should say, together with Leslie Beaumont. I don't know if you can pronounce it in the French fashion or more in the Anglicized. Okay, so Beaumont, I should say, although it really doesn't come over my lips. And Professor Paspalas on the settlements of Zagros on the island of Andros. Among Professor Miller's most valuable contributions, and I just shall name a few, I would like to mention her iconic book, Athens and Persia in the 5th century BC, a study in cultural receptivity, published with Cambridge University Press in 1997 and republished in 2004. I don't think I have seen any further reprints. I'm then aware of the last publication's date, as well as other remarkable studies, such as the co-edited volume, The Origins of Theatre in Ancient Greece, also published with Cambridge in 2007, and many influential articles, among them Persians in the Greek Imagination, published in 2008, and Orientalism and Ornamentalism, Athenian Reactions to Achaemenid Persia in 2006. Please forgive me for being so selective. I'm mentioning some of those that I know better. So that is also just a sign of my own limitations. She has just completed a book on the representation of Persians in Attic art, to which we look forward with much trepidation. In today's talk, Diophante's Kandys, and I hope that is how we pronounce the term Kandys in English, faceted relations between Persia and classical Athens, Professor Miller will investigate the cultural implications against a background of war and power politics between Persia and Athens, the implications of the Athenian woman Diophante, wife of a certain Hieronymus of Acharne, dedicating a Persian median robe, the so-called Kanduka or Kantush, with its old Persian name, to the goddess Artemis at Brauron. And without further ado, I shall invite Professor Miller to the podium. Please welcome her. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the generous introduction, and thank you all for coming. Ask anyone about relations between ancient Greeks and ancient Persians, and you'll hear about the Persian invasions of Greece. Marathon, the Valiant 400, stalwart defense by land and sea, and ultimately defeat of the invaders. Indeed, so glorious was the victory that Attic art broke its no historical content rule and actually depicted battles against Persians, often with remarkable accuracy of detail. But you may also be advised that Edward Said, in his groundbreaking work Orientalism, ascribed to the Greeks the commencement of the long, sad history of Western prejudicial characterization of the East. The most famous expression is Isocrates' formulation, "The barbarian is soft and inexperienced in war and destroyed by a luxurious lifestyle." But that's 4th century. Said looked even further back to Aeschylus's trilogy, his tragedy of the Persians, actually set in the Persian court at Susa. The fantasy raises questions more about moral fiber that Edith Hall and others have emphasized. The arts, too, have their moment of derogatory imaging, like the painter of this little jug of about 470, who takes the mickey out of Persian equestrianism. The Persian sits side saddle on his little donkey, like a peasant off to the fields. He carries his battle axe on his shoulder like a mattock. But he is stranded. Note the donkey's flattened ears and raised tail. It's refusing to budge. Helpless, the Persian gesticulates to his pot-bellied attendant behind him, coming up with a flail to get the dratted beast going. Now, while the seeds of Greek Orientalist reading of Persians, notably Persian kings as weak, luxury-loving, effeminate, and impulsive, can be found in 5th century literature, too often sentiments from the 4th century orators who have a very specific political agenda have been retrojected back to the 5th and 6th centuries BCE. For every sneering observation made by a Greek, I can find testimony to respect for Persian courage and leadership qualities. A more holistic exploration of a range of other evidence, disparate in character, from epigraphy, archaeology, and iconography, against the background of better documented analogous periods, must give us pause. It yields a different and much more interesting picture of the complex web of relations that linked ancient Greek and ancient Persian cultures and their cultural expression in the 6th to the 4th centuries BCE. Perforce, our focus must be on Athens for the simple reason that more evidence survives from there. Yet we must also ask, historical accident or symptom of a deeper cause? And so we turn to Diophante, a woman known to us only from her inclusion of her name on a list of votive offerings made to the goddess Artemis discovered on the Athenian Acropolis. In the latest 5th or 4th century BC, she made a dedication of an item of clothing to Artemis, as you've heard. This view happens to be of Artemis's sanctuary at Brauron in South Attica. Now, what we know about Diophante is the simple entry. Kandys, Diophante, wife of Hieronymus of Acharnae, with gold attachments worn. The inclusion of her husband's demotic, Acharnae, gives us the crucial information that Diophante was the daughter of an Athenian citizen. We do not know the occasion of the dedication. It was customary for women to dedicate prized personal items to Artemis at times of transition. Robert Parker, distinguished historian of Greek religion, points out that items of clothing listed at the Brauonian inventories were probably thanks offerings for successful birth. The fact that this item is characterized as worn fits the description of prized personal possession, as does the fact that it was decorated with gold attachments. But what, as you all know, being who you are, what makes this dedication worthy of note is the fact that it was a Kandys, the most quintessentially Persian item of clothing known to the Greeks. The Kandys is easily recognizable at Persepolis as the garment worn like a cloak with empty sleeves hanging down. What is an Athenian woman doing dedicating a Kandys as a used personal garment? I think that the Kandys can be identified as a sleeved open jacket, sometimes seen in Attic late 5th century and early 4th century vase painting, especially on children. Now, amidst the hundreds of other clothing dedications dedicated to Brauonian Artemis, we find record of 5 other women who also owned a Kandys. 2 Candias were deemed worthy of placement on the cult statue, which itself is recorded as to arama eche. One was multicolored and described as amorgine, which may signify silk. Another was made of linen with colored inweaving, predominantly in green. The earliest listed is simply defined as poikilos, multicolored. These were luxury garments to judge from both their rarity and their rich ornamentation. Now, since the 19th century, the funerary stele of Mitian, now the Getty, has been notorious because it, too, seems to show a woman wearing a Kandys, as was recognized long ago by Amalung. The evidence of the Brauonian inscriptions and Attic vase painting, more generally, supports an Athenian rather than foreign identity for Mitian, though the foreign identity had been suspected. Kingsley, who published an important article on the stele in 1975, knew of the range of evidence for Kandys wearing at Athens and the Brauonian dedications. But there is more. In addition to the Kandys, something known as a sleeved chiton, a cheridotos chiton, also appears in the dedication's inventory list. The garment was so foreign that it did not even have a name, a real name. The term cheridotos chiton is descriptive and picks up on the most surprising aspect of the garment. It had tailored sleeves. A hard look at Attic vase painting recovers a few instances of dedications of Athenian women, or depictions of Athenian women and children who wear a sleeved garment, like this crater and this lekithos. Now, we can wax lyric about the heights of Greek culture and art, their philosophy, their drama, their poetry, their Parthenon. But we have to be really honest about one thing. Greek dress was very primitive, comprised of rectangular lengths of cloth as removed from the loom and wrapped or pinned around the body without further ado. In the traditional Greek wardrobe, quality of dress was conveyed solely through the fineness of the wool from which it was woven and the amplitude with which it was draped. The inclusion of tailored sleeves is a radical departure from traditional Greek dress. Sleeves stand out in contrast to the norm of dress in art. Such garments quote a sartorial grammar recently introduced throughout the Near East by the Persian conquests. This detail from Persepolis of a man wearing the Persian rider rather than court dress shows its design. Alas, the original paint that coloured such sculptures is now lost, and with it any evidence they may have given us for ornamentation. It is a surprise to discover a taste for items of Persian dress in classical Athens. I haven't felt I had time to discuss the Epentates, but I do also believe it's a foreign garment. Even Persian shoes are worn, called persicae, according to Aristophanes, who seems to regard them as luxurious. So whenever Diophante first acquired her Kandys, whether in 420 or 350, Athenians did not normally think of themselves as copying Persians. Quite the contrary. So it was that the clear iconographic and epigraphical evidence for wearing foreign clothes in Athens by respectable Athenian women has been largely ignored. But some years ago, in considering this matter, I observed what I thought was an interesting instance of gender variability. That while Persian masculine dress might seem desirable for Athenian women and little children, Athenian men would not touch it. I wondered if this could be seen as a diagnostic instance of Orientalism. I now suspect that I incorrectly understood what was actually going on. I was swayed myself by the notorious absence of females at Persepolis. In fact, I now charge myself of being Orientalist. The change of perspective arose from a study of iconographic evidence for women's dress in the Achaemenid Persian world. Now, I hope you can see these, they're very small. There is very little evidence. Almost all that I could find is represented on this slide. But what there is seems to show a persistent pattern. In view of the geographic variability of the evidence, the pattern can only be explained as a reflection of local peoples of the empire emulating the same imperial model of dress, which has to be the dress of the feminine imperial elite. I'm afraid you can't read this at all, can you? We have examples from Egypt, Jordan, Iran, Syria, Iraq, and that'll do.
There's Oxus.
And Oxus, yes, Oxus too. But basic elements seem to have included a garment akin to the men's court robe with something like sleeves, a tied sash worn as a belt, and a fairly common but not universal treatment of the hair. None of these figures wears a Kandys. However, other evidence makes it clear that in some regions, at least at the periphery of the Persian world, the Kandys was worn by women. Margaret Gleba has done us an amazing service in collecting the evidence in Scythian context for women wearing a Kandys. Now, men in Persian art, as you well know, only ever wear the Kandys with the rider dress rather than the court dress. Yet these Scythian women seem to wear the Kandys together with a long robe. Moreover, the surviving items of clothing in the permafrost in Central Asia include a Kandys from a women's burial at Pazyryk Barrow II. This is the drawing published by Rudenko quite some time ago. Can we dare believe that the apparent exclusion of women from Kandys wearing has more to do with the general absence of women in Persian mainstream art than with the gendered dress code? In fact, the surviving garments bear testimony to unimaginable levels of decoration. Rudenko reports of this garment as made of squirrel, colt, and otter fur, predominantly black. It was decorated by dark red leather cutout attachments. Rudenko describes the attachments as, quote, something not unlike cock's combs, within which were sewn gold-covered, coppered ram's heads in rings. He goes on to say the rest of the ornament was plant inspiration. Now, I know of no color illustrations of this elaborately decorated women's canvas and have never yet been able to get to the museum that will allow me to see it. Rudenko compares, however, the man's canvas from Katanda, for which there are colour illustrations published. Here, the impact of red appliques and gold beadwork on a dark background is manifest. And so when a handful of fashionable Athenian women adopted the Persian canvas in the later 5th century, they were very likely adopting women's, not men's, clothing types. And adopted clothing that was adorned with a much higher level of ornamentation than was the norm in Greece. Now let's postpone for just a moment the discussion of how this situation could arise and instead look at the experience of the Athenian men. Now, an outsider might suppose that the ancient Athenian male experience composed solely of warfare and drinking parties. But sometimes these two activities do intersect. And I want now to focus on, turn to Xerxes' invasion of Greece in 480-479, with the possible links between Persian booty taken at the Battle of Plataea in 479 and the well-known men's drinking party, the Symposium. This is not the moment to rehearse the history of Xerxes' invasion. I'm sure it's well known to all of you who care, or indeed the climactic Battle of Plataea, although it did provide an important moment for the introduction of a huge influx of foreign goods into the Greek mainland. 2 generations after the Persian invasions, when Herodotus was composing the histories, there were many Greeks who remembered the period and many more who knew about it from talking to someone who was there. One persistent element in the oral tradition about the Persian wars was the incredible wealth of booty. For centuries afterwards, booty remained visible as sanctuary dedications to reinforce popular memory. Some few Persian objects, such as these, have been excavated in Greece, mostly from sanctuaries locations where they were probably dedicated. Dodona, the Athenian Acropolis, Samothrace. And those of you who saw the amazing, beautiful gold color illustration of the Dodona Bracteate last week on Sunday will appreciate that my slide is a very pale imitation of what it looks like. Anyhow, they were found mostly on sanctuaries where they presumably were dedicated. The stamp seal in Berlin is said to have been found by Furtwängler in Athens. Perhaps it was from a burial. The most likely piece of booty is well known. It's the Near Eastern helmet dedicated at Olympia, inscribed, taken from the Medes. Further Persian items there, arrowheads, a possible Goritus attachment, and stamp seal are most surely votive offerings. The most spectacular booty came from Plataea in 479. Herodotus tells us about when the Greeks breached the palisade of the Persian camp and plundered what they believed was the tent of Xerxes. According to Herodotus, and I quote in English, "When Pausanias saw the tent of Mardonius, wrought with gold and silver and multicolored hangings, he commanded the bakers and cooks to prepare a meal just as they had used to make for Mardonius. They prepared everything as instructed. And when Pausanias saw gold and silver clean eyes draped in textiles and gold and silver tables and the rich preparation for the feast, he was astonished at the good things set out. For a joke, he ordered his own servants to prepare a Spartan dinner. The difference between the two was indeed considerable, and Pausanias laughed and sent for the Greek generals. When they arrived, Pausanias showed them the 2 prepared meals and said, 'Gentlemen, I have asked you here to show you the folly of the Persians, who, living in this style, have come against us to rob us of our poverty.'" Now, it's a memorable line, and regardless of its history gives us an insight into one Greek perspective. Now, Herodotus' description of Mardonius' tent might seem fanciful were it not for the fact that we know other examples of palatial architecture translated into the medium of the campaign tent. My favorite comparanda are from the Ottoman campaign tents, knowledge of which we have thanks to the parallel of a more recent and better documented invasion, the Siege of Vienna in 1683. The level of documentation helps us comprehend the complexities of thing studies, thing histories. And so, in 1683, Kara Mustafa, Grand Vizier of Sultan Mehmed IV, advanced to the Habsburg territory to the very gates of Vienna in the final move of expansion. His action provoked an international crisis to which the European powers responded slowly. In the beleaguered city, supplies ran out and defenses crumbled. All seemed doom. But then, under the coordinated attack of a number of fronts, led by the Polish king Jan Sobieski, the Ottoman forces collapsed and their camp fell to the victorious Europeans. The luxury campaign tents of the Turkish noblemen were full of exotic surprises, including a monkey on a silver chain and parrots. A number of these tents survive, carefully preserved as booty in princely collections. They are adorned with bright textiles, leather appliques, elaborate embroidery. Now, the tent of Kara Mustafa himself is lost, but its layout is preserved in this copper plate. Note the complex structure, with 2 tents set inside a tent courtyard with tent towers at each corner. The guards at the entrance, can you make them out? Give a scale, a sense of the scale. The reminiscence of these tents to palace architecture is extraordinary. I don't think it's exaggerated. The Turkish booty from this campaign was staggering. It passed from noble collections to state museums and contributed to emerging national identity. The victory remains, for example, a great moment in modern Polish history thanks to the role of Jan Sobieski. Just as in the 2nd century AD, Pausanias could be shown Persian spoils on the Athenian Acropolis, even to this day, the best collections of Turkish artifacts of this period are to be found in these very cities whose princes played significant roles in the campaigns: Vienna, Karlsruhe, Krakow. Now here you'll see the weaponry, the banners, the saddles and swords, drums and flasks of the vanquished enemy. As a result of all this, and similar encounters with the Ottoman Empire, a new fashion known as Türkerei swept across Europe. Composers like Mozart produced versions of Turkish music. Many a ballet, drama, or opera was given a Turkish setting. European aristocrats adopted Turkish goods and fashions because they connoted wealth and power. Aristocrats who had fought in the Turkish wars posed for portraits wearing Turkish dress. Here is Markgraf Ludwig Wilhelm von Baden, the Turken Louis himself, dressed up in his Turkish garb. These 2 18th century portraits bear witness to the extent to which fascination for things Turkish continued. Some coffee historians ascribe the new rage for this intoxicating drink to the enticing aroma of bags of Turkish beans being roasted in burning tents. More sober historians point to the existence of Turkish coffee houses around the Mediterranean well before 1683. Now, in fact, already a generation earlier, the arrival of Suleiman Aga in 1648 as ambassador to the French court had inspired fashionable ladies of Europe to have their gowns designed à la Turque. This Parisienne evidently fancies her that the clasps on her bodice suffice to give a Turkish air. The captive Turkish seamstresses were treasured for their embroidery work. And for a brief period in the 15th century, we are told, in Italy, elegant women even adorned the Turkish veil. Now, clearly, trade and diplomacy had already started the phenomenon of Türkerei well before the siege of 1683. After Vienna, a qualitative and quantitative change occurred. What had previously been mere curiosity value was now adopted wholesale by the upper echelons of society, from whom it had filtered down to the rest of the populace. Loyalty to the Christian cause and pride in the victory played a role, but more importantly, the elites of Europe eagerly adopted new status symbols that could help them to distinguish themselves in the domestic struggle for prestige. Right, let's go back to Greece and the spoils of Plataea. As described by Herodotus, the booty from Plataea has much in common with the booty from 1683, both in content and in impact. The gold and silver vessels were especially memorable. The terms used by Herodotus are indicative. You can see them written here: fiale, other drinking vessels, sacks of lebetes. Now, Greek fialae were shallow, round-bottomed bowls, while the lebes was a deep, round-bottomed bowl. These were probably the most precise terms that Herodotus could find to convey the distinctive shapes of Persian metalware drinking vessels. The distinguishing feature was that neither had a handle or a base. Very few surviving Persian metalware vessels have good archaeological provenances, but these 2 types, the deep bowl and the shallow bowl, fiale, are well attested. Both survive in silver and bronze. The reliefs of processing gift bearers from the regions of the Persian Empire on the Apadana at Persepolis provide precious, authentic testimony to their existence. The deep bowl appears with a variety of surface treatments. What of the other drinking vessels? Perhaps Herodotus refers to the horizontally fluted beaker, also visible on the reefs, or the spouted amphor-like vessel seen here. Perhaps he means the animal head or animal proton cup, which became known as protome in Greek. The animal head cup is more elusive archaeologically, as it is not depicted at Persepolis, and few surviving examples have good provenances. The presence of animal head cups in the booty has been deduced from some animal protomes on the coinage of Delphi about the Persian War period. The complex question of animal shape and animal proton drinking vessels, I'm happy to say, will be addressed by Susanna Ebbinghaus in her new exhibition at Harvard and its accompanying brilliant catalogue with many, many good examples. What, if anything, was the Greek response to this mass of wealth and exotica acquired as booty? About the time of the Persian Wars, we see an introduction of new vessel types in the Attic ceramic repertoire, whose origin is best explained as Attic ceramic imitations or adaptations of Achaemenid luxury Tauritic vessels. The most famous example of these is a series of animal head drinking cups, similar in so many respects to the Persian model. But the Greeks liked handles, and so added cantharus handles to the Persian handleless vessel. Moreover, as Hoffman has pointed out, while the Attic potters sometimes retained the heroic bestiary of the Persians, like these lion head cups, more frequently Attic potters substituted less noble creatures, like the dog or the donkey. Somewhat less well attested, but equally interesting, is the appearance of imitations and adaptations of Persian deep and shallow bowls in Attic black gloss ceramic. The fragmentary piece on the right is securely dated by context to 470, is one of my favorites, as its details show the struggle a potter had to make to translate lobes, a metalware idiom, into ceramic. The poor man was used to throwing pots on a wheel. Traces of thumbprints are visible on the interior of this. You can see he had to push out from the inside to get the real lobes. And on the outside, perhaps you can make out how it's catching the light, he had to use a blunt instrument to regularize the finish in a manner that's more typical of burnishing. It was a real struggle to make this thing look like a Persian pot. Now, a shallow fiale with Persian offset, everted lip, and horizontal fluting on the bowl as on the left, also entered the Attic repertoire. This is one very experimental example, signed by the innovative potter Socrates, about 460. The fiale is noteworthy for its trichromatic finish. Usually they have one or two colors. These seemed reasonable instances of down-market replication of the kind of precious vessels used by Persians and taken as booty at Plataea. But then, Robert Guy published one-footed ram-held cup in Virginia that on stylistic grounds should date 10, even 20 years before Xerxes' invasion. To see a Persian-type vessel enter Athens before the Persian Wars disrupts our usual understanding. What are we to make of it? Well, one option is we might reconsider the whole stylistic chronology of Attic red figure pottery, as some have done, and date the ramhead vessel and all its kin to after 480. Or we might reconsider the data. And so we find that other evidence corroborates an Athenian response to Persian metal vessels, luxury Tauritic, before the Persian Wars. Securely dated deposits in the Athenian Agora make it clear that already late in the 6th century, Attic black gloss ceramic fialae of Persian form were being produced. A group of horizontally fluted bichrome fialae, red bowls and black rims, also provide good evidence that Persian luxury Tauritic was present in Athens before the Persian Wars, and that it was deemed worthy of emulation in ceramic. An intact example in Castle gives a clearer impression of the appearance. The inevitable conclusion is the great era of imitation, of response, may have been after 479, but the spoils of the Persians' Plataea neither created the taste nor in the first instance supplied the need. What is interesting is that exactly the same phenomenon was taking place in the Western Achaemenid Empire. Over the past 20 years or so, examples have been surfacing in Western Turkey. Imitation Persian bowls reproduced in local ceramic are now known from Diophante, the red star on my map, from Sardis in Lydia, the green star on my map, and from Harta, the yellow star. The occasional Lydian inscription on Persian-style silverware suggests manufacture in Lydia. They may be merely ownership inscriptions and say nothing about the locus of production, yet the evidence of fine spot in Lydia and the gifts of the Lydian delegations on the Persepolis reliefs tend to posit a local manufacture of Persian-looking vessels, luxury therapeutic, in the western provinces of the empire. The local production was used by local elites in a classic case of emulation of status goods already in the early 5th century. Even more interesting, Athena Singarida has now pointed to a number of images in Attic pottery that bear clear witness to the use of luxurious lobed metal fialae in Athens well before the Persian invasions. At the far right of this late 6th century cup with the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the god Hephaestus raises a lobed bowl. The painter Euphronius took special care to show that the item was metal rather than like the Lydian silver bowl I placed above. But it is not clear here or elsewhere whether the precious bowl is being used for libation or for drinking. Perhaps the starting point for knowledge of such drinking vessels would be the Persian conquest of Lydia back in the 540s. The kingdom of Lydia had been a point of reference for Greek high culture for some time, and scholarship has come to realize the extent to which the arts of trouphe or luxury from the East figured in the aristocratic ideology of 6th century Greece. Near Eastern goods provided a welcome means of showing social status distinction. There was little gap between the Lydian court of Sardis and the Greek noble. And against this background comes that first generation of Attic vessels emulating Persian metalware forms. Their excavation from well-stratified agora deposits guarantees both their data before the Persian invasion and their social context. These were not designed for export, though they have also been found in Anatolia, nor were they designed for dedication to the gods, nor were they cheaper substitutes for burials. They were blatant imitations of prestigious metalware vessels in a typical instance of devolution of social status forms. The question is, as Brian Shefton pointed out quite some time ago, how were they used in Athens? Now, there's a clear contrast between the usual Greek grasp of a fiale for libation pouring. That is, hand held with the thumb on the lip and the index finger on the omphalos, and the Persian mode of holding a vessel, such a vessel. The Persian mode is well described in a passage of Xenophon, who wrote in Chiropaideia Book 1. The cupbearers of these kings perform their office with elegance. They pour in the wine with neatness and then present the vessel, conveying it on 3 fingers, and offer it in such a way as to place it most conveniently for the one who is to drink. Now, this mode of service, and also holding one's cup, is brilliantly attested by some Anatolian finds. On the short wall of the Karaburun Tomb 2, down in Lycia, you can see on my map, dated about 500 to 490, the dynast is being served as he reclines on a painted cline above his stone funerary cline. Bruno Jacobs has pointed out that the dynast's robe is Persian, but he himself must have been Lycian in view of the type of his funerary deposition. Here you can see both the attendant on the left and the reclining dynast on the right, holding the shallow bowl on their fingertips. Now, analogous images from a number of regions in the Persian Empire make it clear that everywhere locals emulated the elegant Persian mode of holding a round-bottomed vessel on their 3 fingertips. Their 3 fingers. Here is Georgia, Armenia, and Egypt. And unprovenant stamp seals also bear witness to the practice. There's a fascinating concentration of this new Persian fingertips drinking mode on the funerary stelae of West Anatolia in the region of the satrapal capital at Daskyleon. The most recent contribution to this group is the exciting discovery in 2010 of a sarcophagus at Milas in Caria, Mylasa. It has been identified as the tomb of the Carian king Hecatomnus. The sarcophagus is beautifully sculpted, and the main theme On the long side is a reclining symposiast. He is accompanied by a seated wife and numerous attendants. Hekatomnos, if it is indeed he, gracefully holds his drinking vessel on his 3 fingers. So you can imagine my surprise when, leafing through a publication of the burials at Pydna in Macedonia, I came across an image of an Attic red-figured mid-4th century crater. It has rather sort of generic treatment of a standard subject, men reclining at a symposium with music, talk, and wine, the usual stuff. But note that the middle finger, who gives every impression of being an Athenian symposiast, instead of the usual calyx, he balances a drinking bowl on his 3 fingers. Persian elegant drinking manner has arrived in middle-class Athens, it seems, by the mid-4th century. So let's go back to that Milissa sarcophagus and have a look at the attendant who carries an intriguing animal proton vessel. Here's a detail photograph which I'm most indebted to Gojan Polat. He holds the vessel in his left hand as if it were a serving vessel. Look how it rests in the palm of his hand, rather like some people carry newborn babies. Just of course, it's no newborn baby, this is clearly a metalware vessel. Anyhow, he holds it in his palm of his hand, and it makes me wonder whether this is actually a true rhyton, and that perhaps he is using his middle finger, his index finger, to keep closed the spout through which wine would pour if he lets go. And so he's waiting attentively until it's time to serve wine in the dynast's drinking bowl. Now you have to imagine, we have to be very, very good at this to do it without making a terrible mess. Now, we have looked at a number of Persian imitations of Persian animal head cups in Athens. Some of the vessels, not these ones especially, but some of the vessels were actually pierced. But how were they used in actual dining reality? It's a problem. Hilariously, it seems this 4th century symposiast on a crater in Vienna may not have realized that the proper etiquette was to have someone pour wine into your cup for you. He happily slushes wine. You can see it, the stream of wine coming down from his rhyton into his drinking bowl that he's holding, not in the elegant mode. Even worse manners are exhibited by a drinker on a crater in Athens. He pours his wine directly into his mouth. Now, for the symposiast painted inside a Macedonian tomb of the late 4th century, we see a symposium here where the central figure has an extraordinary large winged, griffin-winged drinking vessel, again, seemingly made of metal. It appears that he's intending to drink from it, but the wings, I think, would make it very difficult to drink as a regular cup from the top. So here too, we must have, I imagine, a rhyton. That is a vessel through which wine is to be poured into something else, but he seems not to have a bowl. So he too might be preparing to engage in such sort of acrobatic drinking practices. I don't know that this would be the proper Persian way of doing things. I wish we had more evidence of what was. And that gets us to questions of states of knowledge. Implicitly in all of this emerges the realization that there must have been significant communication between the peoples of the Western Persian Empire, even Persians, and the peoples of Athens. But before we take a look at how this works out at the state level, I would like to show you a few intriguing focal points that make it absolutely clear to the extent and intimacy of knowledge amongst the people of mainland of Greece. Because when we look at the Athenian state as a whole, we must realize that the process of choosing traits to emulate was highly selective and well informed. Now, the first of my hints of accurate knowledge is at a material, not philosophical level, is in fact not even Athenian. It's a Boeotian black figure, Skyphos, with the earliest Bactrian camel in Greek art, dating about 540. The surprise gestures of the onlookers convey the novelty of the subject. Of a special interest to us, though, is the mode of conducting. Above the tip of the camel's nose is a little heart-shaped item in added red. Now, the use of a V-shaped nose peg in just this position is attested on the Apodaina reliefs at Persepolis. It appears as a means of controlling specifically Bactrian camels of those delications that bring them. It seems that the name vase of a camel painter has ethnographic as well as anatomic accuracy in its detailing. And say, this dates to just about the time of the conquest of Lydia. My second hint of accurate knowledge is on the Tondo, the Triptolemus painter's battle cup. As I've mentioned, Attic painted battles of the Persian War period like this exhibit remarkable accuracy in details in dress and equipment. In this case, note the elasticity of the Persians' zigzag trousers. I guess I should point this out. It's easier to walk to it. The zigzags are bigger here and smaller there. But recent research in Munich by Professor Owen Emmerling and his team explains the elasticity of Persian trousers by the textile technique sprang. We don't have time to go to the details of this, but I'm absolutely convinced he has found the answer. This was sprang, woven woolen, entwined sprang, creates that elasticity, and all the phenomena that we have of, look at your Attic Seer, there's an art. When you go back, okay, have another, and you can see that for very many examples, it's really clear that the artist knew about sprang and was actually accurately depicting it on his pot. Okay, so, Attic painters knew Persian dress well enough to capture the stretchiness of sprang. I cannot resist showing the Kuropi textile fragment, such a precious survival from the 5th century, owing to its deposition in anaerobic bronze vessel. This little scrap gives testimony to the technique of embroidery, but the motif chosen for depiction is nothing other than the Persian pacing lion, well known in gold bracteate form, and also occurring as subsidiary ornamentation on sculpture in contexts that make it look very much like it is reminiscent of working in textiles, whether bracteate or woven in. The gold bracteates similarly lie behind my fourth example of accurate knowledge, and perhaps the most surprising. A late archaic Attic cup tondo includes a hoplite bearing a shield whose ensign is the lion with radiate mane, again familiar from textile context as a real or virtual clothing attachment. I'd be surprised if any actual Athenian shield had such an adornment. But that makes it even more interesting here, that the potter found this Persianizing design was so visually attractive as to make it an interesting detail to decorate a shield on a cup. That's particularly interesting. And it suggests that playing with ideas like this could happen in the minor arts in a way the major arts would not allow. But before we look at my fifth instance of accurate knowledge of Persian realia and life on the part of workers in Athens, we need to have a... Oh dear, I'm being very long, sorry about this. We need to have a look at some of the evidence of the Persian mode of horse tending. These three drawings of delegations at Persepolis bringing horses as gifts all exhibit the same features, which I take as diagnostically the Persian equestrian mode. On the forehead, there is a top knot, and on the tail is tied. Now let's have a look at a little-known cup in Lincoln, that is the Lincoln in England. Here we have a warrior gazing pensively at what seems to be a partial column shaft. What is interesting is his shield adornment. It is a braying ithyphallic donkey. Now this is unique so far as I know, as well as being a bit rude. But it gets better. This donkey has Persian-style top knot and tied tail. Very intriguing. He's not just any old donkey, he's a Persian donkey. And I don't read this as disparagement of the impressive qualities of Persian cavalry, whose military prowess is well known to their enemies. This is an image of comfortable play, but for our purposes, the significant thing is that this image bears witness to the extent of local visual awareness of Persian ideas in 5th century Athens, not among the generals and the diplomats, but the potters and painters of the Kramikos. So this microscopic vantage point, seeing that potters, whoever they were, decorating for whatever market, utilized Persian idiom as part of the decorative vocabulary. This provides a useful index of knowledge about the Persian world. Somehow, to me, it makes it more intelligible, the role of the Persian standard for luxurious dress or elegant drinking vessel, or even mode of personal attendance with fan or parasol, which we have not had time to look at today. These are not one-off things, but part of a bigger package of cultural dialogue. What is especially interesting is that these traces of knowledge are parochial, testimony to direct observation on the part of the craftsman. And so we turn to the state response. The Athenian state response to the Persians is very interesting and worked out in a variety of ways at different levels. We can't look at all of this, and it has been topic of interesting discussion by a number of scholars doing interesting work. But, for example, on the one hand, in the 470s and the 460s, the Athenians developed a new mythology to convey their struggles against the Persians in mythical terms. They turned them into Amazons invading Athens to retrieve their queen. Battling Persians largely disappears from Greek art in this period, mid-century. An even more interesting development happened from about the mid-5th century, a process by which the citizens of classical Athens collectively laid claim to aristocratic prestige. They insisted on their pure blood in a new mythology based on the Attic chthonic heroes. They had always ruled their land. They were no Johnny-come-latelys like the Spartans who migrated to the Peloponnesus with the return of the children of Heracles a mere few hundred years previously. Athenians prided themselves in being the metropolis, the mother city of all those Ionian Greeks who had migrated through the Aegean to the west coast of Anatolia. They safeguarded their privileged standing by introducing strict citizenship laws. Within the citizenship ranks, egalitarianism was introduced to a degree few have matched since. Yet the distinction between citizen and non-citizen was in some senses merely a reformulation of the old distinction between aristocrat and non-aristocrat. And so the Athenian military hegemony over their allies in their common war against Persia metamorphosed into an empire with surprising speed. Now, another number of interesting observations have been made about the relationship between the Acropolis building program and Athenian imperialism, with the Persians always in the background. We must never forget that at the end of the 5th century, when the cataclysmic Peloponnesian War took place, each side was anxiously seeking Persian financial and military support to defeat the other. Now, I find a useful lens through which to think about imperial Athens of the second half of the 5th century is a 2002 study by the historian David Kandys, Ornamentalism, How the British Saw Their Empire. Now, Kandys argued compellingly that an important feature of the British Empire in the 19th and earlier 20th centuries was the perception on the part of the British elite that the elites of their imperial subjects were their own natural allies against a rising tide of industrial, urban egalitarianism. The British systematically co-opted the elites of their empire, introducing new military-style decorations to create a hierarchy of service to the Queen, displayed most spectacularly in public events, such as Curzon's carefully orchestrated Delhi Durbar of 1903. Whatever the social context intended in the procession reliefs of Persepolis, tidbits from different sources make it clear that the Persian kings also knew well the power of the rhetoric of inclusion and ranked inclusion to ensure the longevity of their empire in something very much akin to British ornamentalism. A similar procession rhetoric can be traced in classical Athens, leading to the same ornamentalist mode. Two processions come to mind, the Greater Dionysia and the Panathenaea. The Panathenaea, of course, had been an important civic event for a very long time. In the mid-5th century, the requirement that the Greek peoples, euphemistically called the allies of the Athenians, bring a cow and panoply made the Panathenaea festival procession an important locus for projecting the new imperial order. This ornamentation, this extension of the privilege of inclusion within the procession to the allies, surely owed something to the Persian model. Moreover, at some point in the 5th century, the Athenian girls who led the Panathenaic processions as basket bearers were accorded the visual distinction in the form of parasols held for them by the daughters of the non-citizen residents. We have no visual testimony to this skiadephoria, but the little girl on the right seems to have been in a procession, sheltered, like the great king at left, by a parasol bearer. A curious scene on a skyphos of the period of the elaboration of the Panathenaea in Athens, about 440, is noteworthy. It is usually understood to relate to the Anthesteria festival, when the Basilina, wife of the Archon Basileus, and so a very important woman in Athens, the Basilina symbolically married the god Dionysus. Now here a woman processes, decently garbed in himation and chiton. Her parasol bearer is a surprise. Not only is he a satyr, he wears the Persian royal crown, the dentate crown, as Margaret Root herself has pointed out. Some sort of visual parody is surely intended, but it is a parody that presupposes a level of knowledge about Persian royal procession protocol, here inverted with the crown wearer serving as parasol bearer. The Greater Dionysia, or the festival to Dionysus, similarly had a long history in the Attic festival calendar, as the ship cart imagery of the 6th century in the upper right makes clear. It too underwent modification as circumstances required, so that in the mid-5th century, a clear connection between the Dionysia and the empire was forged. At the time of the Dionysia, the allies of the Athenians were required to bring their tribute, their phoros, to Athens and to process with it through the city. Now the procession extended from the Agora along the street of the Tripods and around the east end of the Acropolis, past the Odeon of Pericles towards the sanctuary of Dionysus, to be brought into the theatre of Dionysus for display, talent by talent. In this way, the Dionysiac procession embraced the allies within the body politic, while placing them in a firmly subordinate position. Now, such ornamentalist procession rhetoric has its roots in traditional Greek ritual practice, which often included processions from one important location to the altar where public offerings to the god took place. It's a communal act. The daring elaboration of this procession through social status distinction and expanded codes of inclusion very likely represents an unconscious rather than deliberate adoption, I think, of the Persian model. After all, the Persian Empire was spectacularly the best example of imperial practice to the people in Greece. What was deliberate, though, was the construction of the monumental, if largely made of wood, building beside the sanctuary of Dionysus, adjacent to, but some meters above, with its pyramidal roof beside the street of the Tripods. This is known as the building of the Odeon of Pericles, and it was an important element of the so-called Periclean building program. But unlike the rest of the program, which tended to work within the standard idioms of Greek architectural practice, temples in the Doric and Ionic order, most but not all in the Acropolis, this building was a radical experiment. It's tempting to see it as, yes, certainly modified version of the Persian royal apadana type, to be used to be an architectural sort of statement of empire with conspicuous Persian features, if by no means anywhere like, in detail, a Persian apadana. But it's time to draw these things together. If we focus on the material evidence, albeit aware of the major historical dates of the period, we can see clear indications that already in the second half of the 6th century, the Persians, in conquering Western Anatolia in the mid-5th century, had largely supplanted the Lydians as arbiter of good taste. Already in the latest 6th century, we see ceramic emulations of Persian metalware forms, and very likely at the same time were such forms actually physically in Athens. We see the adoption of new ways of showing social class distinction by the conspicuous consumption of labor, parasol bearers, fan bearers. We find occasional actual imports, which in view of the huge loss of the material record over 2 millennia, can hint at the vast quantity of imports that were around in the classical period. We can trace traces of receptivity to Persian modes of textile, adornment, and even clothes, and hints that even the Persian mode of drinking could be adopted, despite strong cultural pressures to play kotobos at symposia with handled cups. Alas, we have no trace of the peacocks that Pyrilampes was said to have brought home, been given to him by the great king. I couldn't resist showing you a peacock. This is literary tradition only, that the Pyrilampes brought home peacocks as a gift to the Persian king, and which he showed for a price to the adoring audiences back in Athens. Now, how much did Athens owe to the Persians for the creation and organization of their own short-lived empire? Though only occasionally have actual derricks been found, like at the top in Athens, it's clear that the strength of the Persian imperial economy and imperial forces ever and always lay in the background and profoundly impacted on Athenian thought over the 2 centuries of their coexistence across the Aegean Sea.
Margaret, thank you for that wonderfully rich study. You're absolutely right that the Greeks were never famous for their dress. What the Greeks were famous for, or should I say infamous for, was their undress. And there is a tad of the reverse Orientalism here, if not Occidentalism. I mean, the idea in the ancient Near East and in places like Persia of a bunch of guys exercising nude, or even this bunch of Spartans at Thermopylae or Athenians at Marathon charging the Persians in the buff is really like, my God, are they really doing this? But I'm glad that you ended with that slide, because I've got a whole bunch of questions. First of all, the innocuum.
Yes.
And what is it about that shape? Because it's also the same shape that we see the Eurymedon Emen vase. And I'm wondering, I mean, and it's not something that's characteristic in the panoply of Athenian innocuary shapes. It's something that's idiosyncratic, it's something that's fairly rare. And I was wondering if there's a Near Eastern or a Persian origin for it, particularly in metal, because it looks like a metal vase. And also, not only the one you showed, but also the Eurymedon Emen vase.
Sorry, I didn't show you that. I do apologize.
Yeah, is making these caricatures. So I'm wondering, are they of similar date? Are they a particular vase painter, a particular group? What's going on here? And also the vase that was found in Pydna. Are you sure it's Attic and not Olympian or Northern Greek red figure?
Look, you probably know Northern Greek red figure far better than I do. Bessius thought it was Attic, and so I accept his identification.
I have to ask him, because he's our collaborator.
Oh, right, is he? Oh, great. I mean, I couldn't believe it. This is a wonderful catalogue.
Because
wonderful site.
It doesn't immediately, you know, the fabric from the photograph doesn't immediately look Athenian, but it can well be.
Well,
but I was really wondering about
the Form 7 Oinokoi. Yeah. Look, this is indeed a very distinctive form, and it's linked to the Italian Schaubelkane, has long been pointed out, and it Schauenberg, in fact, when he first wrote the article publishing the notorious Eurymedon Emen Oinokoi, this is the Oinokoi, everyone, if you don't know it, where Greek is preparing to bugger a Persian, basically. And it's funny on many different levels, but we won't go there. But he I think managed, to my mind, argued successfully that it had definitely a sort of Greek presence. It appears throughout the whole period. Later 5th century, we have a couple of workshops that especially make this part, and it's decorated in a variety of subjects. So I'm afraid, although I have a good list of Form 7 Oinokoi that show Persians, some form of Persians, in my catalogue of Persians, that is not the only thing those painters do, those potters do. I have wondered whether there's something about the shape that kind of lends itself to a sort of the sides working together. I mean, the more typical example of decoration, in fact, is a battle scene where it's wrapping around the pot. So I'd love to say, oh yes, indeed. I mean, the painter especially liked to play with the idea of Persians on two sides of a Form 7 Oinokoi, but I don't think the data can take us there, sadly. But you're right about the nudity, and in fact, I actually have wondered in the latest representations of Greeks battling Persians, the Greek is always spectacularly naked. I'm not sure I agree with those who hold that marathon they ran naked. I think they actually wore armor.
Catherine, you have a question too. I just wanted to add glass vessels in there, because some of the lobe, the imitations in black glaze. I wonder if they could come from not just load metal vessels from Persia, but also glass, because in the same cemetery at Pydna, you will find an influx of Persian Achaemenid glass types that are coming in, probably coming back with Alexander's returning troops, and at least that's the idea.
Yes.
Diophante has worked on these. So there's also the glass as well as the gold and silver.
I have to admit, I was looking at that book for the
Yeah.
glass, not the crater.
And I know you know that, but I just wanted to.
But it's a good point. It's another, shall we say, molded, poured vessel type, which is absolutely linked with Persians, the clear glass vessel, and would have been extraordinarily amazing to Greeks. It happens not to survive very much in the southern Greek record, but yes, I'm sure you're right.
And Pydna has also intrigued me. This is the place from which Themistocles escapes to the Persians. And as we know, the Macedonians are notoriously ambiguous, at least, are they on the Persian or the Greek side? And so northern Greece is a whole, as you and Stavro and everyone knows. Exactly, yeah.
Straight up there.
Yeah, so Pydna seems to be the exit route for Persian-friendly Greeks, so it may have a longer history. We can go over this later, but John and I can move down the dates of all that pottery in the Ankara for you.
Well, Susan Rotroff, she's really done a good job with questioning the Ankara deposits, and she was trained there, and it's really interesting that she wants to put all of those archaic deposits there.
Yeah, and the next year, thanks to the hospitality of the Getty Scholars Program, Kathleen Lynch will be here working on Greek pottery in the Achaemenid world, but she also works in the Agora, so we can all tackle her on that. Yeah. I'll pass this back to Catherine, who may have a political question. My political question is going to be, you've got it.
And I apologise, it's not a political question. It is, strangely enough, another vase shape question, arising entirely from ignorance. In your early slides showing the little girls wearing the Kandys, I think it was, I was struck by how many of these vases are kois.
Yes.
So what is going on there?
No, you're absolutely right. Oops, I didn't do that well, did I? Oh, yes, but you're absolutely right. We do have kois, especially featuring these things.
You mentioned the antisterior.
Yes. Look, we have a little problem, constantly we have a problem, as you know, with evidence. I've gone too far, I think. Oh, well. There are two issues here. Yes, indeed, they're kois, and that is extraordinary. Also, it is the case that most of the representation of children we have, in fact, are on koes, so that one does not know the extent to which these two facts are accidental concurrences, as it were. The little fellow at left does not necessarily look like he's in a festive circumstance. She seems to be engaging in what looks like a ritual activity in her lovely outfit, and the little fellow at right, well, very much looking like a sort of Dionysiac scene. So it could be suggested that one interpretation has been this is just simply Sunday dressed equivalent, that you get dressed up in the fanciest clothes for ritual activities. And that's a perfectly reasonable explanation. I can't go much further than that, though, because there are odd bits and pieces that don't fit necessarily into that interpretation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Meg, for your talk. I had a question about, I think, section 3, the ethnography section, and my question is about how to read and understand the reliefs on the Apadana of the delegations there. So, as I understand it, there's a debate in the literature. Are these delegations bringing objects that are typical of their particular ethnicity and that represent their homeland in some way from the Persian point of view, or in the case of the Greeks, for instance, Delegation 12 were bringing these metal vessels. Are these Achaemenid or Persian objects that have circulated so far as to, find themselves in the hands of Greeks, and therefore, the presence of these objects in the hands of foreign peoples shows the incredible soft power of the Persian Empire. So, as I understand it, those are different possibilities, maybe with different answers for each delegation, but I wanted to ask you what your stance on it was, because it could have quite different implications for your argument, if the Bactrian camel, for instance, and the nose decoration is perceived in Greece as a typically Persian thing, or is it typically Bactrian thing, and whether Greeks would have differentiated these things, or if it was all just sort of Eastern people in general. But that might have quite different implications for Persianism in the West.
Well, that's a big question. You should save it and ask it to Margaret Root when she's here next year, because she'll certainly have a very clear understanding of her thoughts on the subject, and I would not disagree with her ever on matters to do with Persian art. You raise a really important point. That is, I tend to use the Persepolis reliefs as a benchmark of reality in the total flux of the lack of good provenance or floating the movement of the artifacts that were actually used or available at the time. Now, two or three things I can point out, and that is, yes, back up. The animals that are brought by delegations to Persepolis, or brought by the delegations at Persepolis, all seem to have geographic regional specificity. So that the Bactrian camels are only brought by the Eastern Iranians, for example. The horses are brought by the right sorts of people. The Arabian camel is brought by, and so on and so forth. So that the animals seem to be, shall we say, from their regional areas coming to the center. The vessels are more problematic. I mean, certainly the clothing, I think. It looks like, by and large, it is actually, as far as can be judged by comparandum, we have so little comparandum, but it actually seems, by and large, to be truly ethnographically accurate for the different peoples of the empire. But the vessels themselves, the torques brought, the jewelry brought, the bowls brought, the other interesting shapes, it's much harder to be confident about them. I personally, again, my colleagues who work in Iranian archaeology should answer this more better than I can, but my general sense is that these distinctive shapes are found, with or without good provenance, wide enough within the wider region of the Persian Empire that they must all derive from a similar point. The similarity between the Lydian treasure artifacts and the Persepolis reliefs decorations is extraordinary to me, really extraordinary. But I can come up with a range of possible explanations for that. But that there is that similarity is very clear. Maybe my Iranian colleagues can comment on this.
I think one thing that's interesting is that if we go back a little bit to the Assyrians, that booty was often paid in these vessels. And so because they have such a wide circulation already by the 6th century in the Near East, they're very much international style, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not these raita and other things have such a wide circulation, I don't think we have the evidence, but we can see in a place like Hasanlu in Western Iran that we have things that are similar. So I would put what we see on the reliefs into that larger category of what people took as booty. And in particular, horses, camels are all valuable for the military, and that's one reason I think you see them on the reliefs. Right. So I was wondering, actually, my question is, what do we know about what the Greeks took as booty in warfare? You showed this wonderful example of Austria, but what do we know about the Greeks? What did they consider worth taking?
Well, as far as I can see, and I'm drawing now from a long time ago, a close examination of the evidence for the Persian war booty or descriptions with observations at different museums of what's there. And I'll stop here for a moment and say, if you happen to go to Olympia, to the storerooms there, they have shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of bronze helmets. Military helmets.
Yeah.
Helmets. Hoplite helmets. It's amazing how many helmets.
There were 15 volumes publishing.
Greek helmets.
I mean Greek helmets. I'm so amazed at this fact. I'm not even giving the details properly. But yes, these are Greek helmets that must have been dedicated at Olympia. Now, why would you give a helmet to Olympia? It's not going to be an athletic victory kind of thing. We do have athletic victories in the Olympic Games giving, thanks offerings, whatever. We have that. These are military dedications. And we have other cases where surviving. Rarely does this kind of thing survive archaeologically for a variety of reasons, as you know. But where we do have surviving lists of inventoried items and bits and pieces that survive archaeologically, it seems that a lot of weaponry was indeed dedicated at sanctuaries after a successful campaign. So clearly, weapons were taken. In fact, as far as I can imagine, every portable item was taken. At Plataea, we are told that word was sent out to collect everything and bring it to the common good, where it was redistributed amongst the participants of the battle, and they gave the decate, the 10% to the gods, and the rest went out elsewhere. And this description of what happened at Plataea seems pretty likely to be the sort of thing that happened more generally. Archaeologically, we don't often see it. At Olympia, the helmets happen to have survived. I'm sorry, but that's not what you asked about.
Yeah, we have lists of booty, and Akhenaten's Persian dagger types.
Do you have any lists of...
We actually do. Some of the Acropolis inventory lists that survive now look like they have booty on them. And we do have the testimony of Pausanias, who's writing his 2nd century AD guidebook to Greece, does in fact often mention booty that he has seen in the sanctuaries he's visiting throughout his travels in his 2 books in Greece.
Miguel John had a question.
Sorry.
Waiting his turn.
Yes, no, there's no problem to lend the microphone to Mac. Thank you very much. We talked a lot about how high the quality of the Villa Scholars is, but this is of course beyond that. I had actually a question. So what you showed was in a way, let's say, new, but it was also new when you compare it to a kind of image we still have, an image in which East is East and West is West. So you show that actually a very normal kind of culture contact was going on, and that has not something to do with Persian imperialism at all. So there's a very interesting parallel with the Roman world, for instance, that the old idea was only when the Romans came to Western Europe things started to change, until people find out that the Celts, for instance, that they started living in cities 100 years before the Romans were there. And I was also reminded of Napoleon and Egypt, this whole idea that Napoleon goes to Egypt and only then France is overtaken by Egyptian objects. No, already before. It's only an intensification of connectivity, you could say. So this is of course very important, because we still have this image that this would be remarkable, but if you look at it from, let's say, an anthropological, historical perspective, this is what you would expect. So if we take that as a point of departure, what does strike you in this, let's say, normal way of culture contact? So we have a Persian Commonwealth. Greece is, of course, in contact with the Persian Commonwealth. So what is striking in what they take over and what they do not take over?
Yeah, that is, of course, the crucial question, and it ties into with our observation about the Assyrian past. Now, I have tended to look at any lobed vessel as being Persian, but it is absolutely true that we have analogous things at Gordian before and also elsewhere. So I'm using a kind of sleight of hand to say all Persian. But what is interesting and distinctive is the levels and periods of receptivity to these foreign ideas. And we can't really get into the whole first millennium story right now, but just as from time to time people, the whole idea of orientalizing art is a very good example, where suddenly people start wanting to make beautiful contour-lined outlines of floral motifs after decades, century of doing rectilinear geometric ornamentation. It was not because they suddenly met foreign ideas. Something was happening from within to make that change. And what I find really interesting about this whole period I've been looking at is we do from time to time in Greek ceramic history have manifest imitations of foreign vessel types. But I don't think we have any other time where it's so dramatic. I mean, Crete, in the Archaic period in Crete, some really beautiful examples of copying of foreign forms. But this idea of picking up on Persian ideas of other media and replicating them in ceramic is quite a break from what had gone on before, and quite frankly, what would go on again. So they had been in contact, yes, right the way down the line. And let's face it, the Aegean's a small sea. You know, you can really, communication had been happening. Why did they suddenly at this time start imitating or reproducing this kind of thing while carrying on as they always had? They were still doing their craters and other things, but they started introducing these other ideas into their standard vocabulary. And I think the only explanation for that can be the extraordinary power and wealth and the sort of the gloriousness of the Persian Empire. I mean, it was the first real world empire. And the Assyrians had been impressive and had also given ideas, certainly ideas into Greek narrative and visual narrative as well as other forms of thought. But this seemed to be a qualitatively different kind of presence, as a guess.
And very briefly, one follow-up question, if I may. So what I found so absolutely fascinating is that, if I understand you correctly, the main agents of these chains are objects. So my trackers are objects. Yeah. Okay.
I can posit, and indeed I do posit, dinner parties in Anatolia, in Lydia, wherever, people actually eating together,
yes, of course,
using these things. And we have a whole tradition of guest friendship gifts, of people giving precious things to people with whom you have dinner. I mean, it's just it's so much part of the heroic, the aristocratic mode of living that I absolutely imagine, but have no evidence whatsoever, that is the basis of by and large, social contact throughout much of this period. We hear only about the historical pinpoints, and those pinpoints do include diplomatic embassies, which must have had socializing as part of their activity. So artifacts is all we have. Sorry, you want to ask?
Claire has a question, and I've already asked my question, so I'll wait.
Perhaps another phenomenon similar to the ones you've brought up here that you've talked about in the past, but on the reverse side of the Hecatomnos sarcophagus is a fabulous lion hunt scene. And so I wonder if you want to just talk a little bit more about that, because that also reflects itself in art. Of course, it was earlier, and then it seems to go into abeyance, but it comes back in a big way in the later 5th century. And like your side saddle figure, you also reproduced another oinakoe with a Persian who's been dismounted and is running, flapping his hands in fear as a lion is taken down his horse. So that whole Persian ethos of elite hunting iconography seems to explode again in this period.
Yes, absolutely, and one can only imagine. Again, one has the data one has. Okay, tends to be representations of lion hunts suddenly appearing. Lions have been big with Heracles and all that in the past, and we have textual evidence of the Persian royal hunt. And various bits and pieces of evidence suggesting that the royal lion hunt was an important, shall we say, courtly activity, and that therefore the sudden appearance of this kind of subject matter in the arts of the Western Empire and in Athens should be a reflection of an actual social practice that was going on, that was known about, and in which some, maybe Greeks, actually participated in as visiting. I was going to say scholars, that's not the right word.
Alexander participates in a big way.
Please, go ahead. I have to go back to. No, they aren't. They just. No, let's do not do my business. Okay. All right. I thought this question might come from Catherine Morgan, but under your category 4 of all the imperial strategy, one of the most intriguing things I've learned recently is an idea, I think first promulgated by Kurt Rafflaub, that the organization of the Delian League, which became sort of an Athenian league, and the idea of tribute being paid to Athens is basically ripped off from the Persians. And that is fascinating because, of course, it's founded as a defensive league against the return of the Persians to Greece, and then it becomes like NATO, associated with one country in particular, right? But I don't know if anyone else has heard of this notion or what they think of it, and if I'm even correct that it was Kurt Rafflaub's idea.
Sounds plausible, but...
Yeah, look, I don't recall, he certainly does think it, and I'm totally sympathetic to this idea. It fits, it works, it makes a lot of things make sense.
Well, it's basically a secondary state formation process.
Well
But it's
put.
not a state. These are individual poleis. They're all called poleis. There's only one polis that becomes in control of it. It's secondary empire to
No
go
escape,
formation.
but it
But no,
military predecessor.
they only occupy people that they don't pay tribute.
Well, yes, but the thing is, they do all come together and they do their thing on Delos and so on and so forth. So they're
Well, and some of them have to come to Athens.
well, then they have to come to Athens. Yeah, but it's if you think of the various previous koinonia, with the common associations, leagues for the purposes of defense and warfare, whatever, one cannot think of anything precisely as carefully thought out and well funded as this. So that the notion that the Persian Empire provided a model with its not delegations, with its army contingents from the different satrapies makes perfect sense to me. So I'd say I like Kurt's idea.
Please, if I may ask a question as well. I think the ornamentalism idea that you mentioned, so that, for example, the use of local colorite in order to show the reach of the empire in the British way that you mentioned doesn't really work for the Persian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really help at all. As Elizabeth mentioned, and as Sarah mentioned, as again, with respect to the Athenian world with reference to Aufla, they really bring tribute, and they say so on the inscriptions.
Yes.
It's called the Baji. And time and again it is stated in the inscription that the people on the Mediterranean have brought the Baji, and etc. So there is no attempt by any Persian elite or the ancient empire to accommodate the local character of another of another subjected nation in order to show to show basically the reach of the empire. That doesn't work in there. But I was wondering whether there is maybe some of that in Athens itself, in all of the artifacts that we have shown. Is there maybe a different quality between the pre-Platea or pre-Xerxesian, so to say, campaign and the post-Xerxes campaign, in the sense that obviously early on you have only imitation, emulation, the desire to emulate the riches of the Persian Empire. But what about thereafter, when the Athenians have the Delian League? Is the notion of ornamentalism maybe playing a role here, trying to include the Persians with a different meaning, not a meaning that they are emulating them, that maybe they own them to some extent, they have defeated them. So the same principle that you have been basically playing on with respect to the Bernardine work. So is there a different quality of imitation to be seen? So not just imitation in the sense that the Persians are obviously the dictator of good taste, but inclusion of the Persian, in the sense that maybe you also have reached the boundaries, you have defeated them, maybe you own them in a certain sense as well. And I was wondering, in the last time you showed a wonderful depiction of a small boy on an Athenian vase with African features. And I don't know where that belongs to.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what period that belongs to.
But that's 5th century.
So post or pre-Platea?
That one's post, yes.
Post. So that would maybe be a sign of Athenians trying to do that, basically, to adopt a local colorate in order to say, to explicate the reach as well in different places. Anyhow, that was an idea, but then you can ascribe different qualities to the emulations, prior and post.
I think it's a really fun idea, and I like it.
I hope it was not fun.
No. But, no, when I say fun, what I mean is it's intriguing and something I want to think more about. Our constant problem, I shouldn't keep saying that, is the evidence. And the difficulty of being sure that one tidbit of evidence represents a whole phenomenon and working with that. But I will think about that. I'm thinking about the different evidence we have for the different diplomatic engagements, embassies, where there was various kinds of rhetoric were taking place. Alas, we do not have quite what I'd like to have textual evidence for the sort of thing you're talking about. I can posit seeing it in the imagery, but I'm not sure I'd be confident.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering what, or if there is, how much of an element of sarcasm is there in these things? Because only the king in the Achaemenid art or in Assyrian art can have the parasol. And you showed a very, what shall I say? It certainly
lowly Athenian woman.
Yeah, right. It's certainly a backhanded compliment anyway. And likewise, this garment with this little child or a woman, they're men's garments. So what element is there in these things of sarcasm, I guess I should say,
Or misunderstanding.
Or misunderstanding. But I don't think you misunderstand the parasol and if you see
But if
it.
somebody just brought you a parasol, you wouldn't know that. You haven't seen Persepolis.
Yeah, you were under the raid if you had.
We do have parasols also for the dinas of Western Anatolia, the various. Yeah, so it's not in the sort of the more local idiom.
But they're the rulers.
They are the rulers. They are the important people. Yes, and this is where the whole idea of having the non-citizen daughters carrying parasols for the citizen daughters is really quite extraordinary. Because it gives shall we say, a royal prestige to a whole class of people, and that's playing with and responding to that model. I think in awareness of the model, but giving it, I don't want to give it a democratic spin on it, but it almost has that tendency. So it elevates the whole people to this kind of level.
Yeah, I think what also fits into your whole scenario so neatly is the totality of the evidence. I mean, at the end of the day, is it 95, 99% of the iconography is Athenian? Okay, what will we know about the Persians if it wasn't for Herodotus? I mean, he wasn't an Athenian, but he was infamous in Athens.
He can be an honorary Athenian for our purposes. Yeah.
And what's remarkable about the potters, of course, in the Academic course, is how multicultural they were. Lidos, the Lydian, Syriskos, the little Syrian, Vrigos, the Phrygian, Amasis, which is a demonstrably Egyptian name,
yes.
And even wacky Greek names that are clearly Vekeklevis, which are clearly not Athenian or Attic. They're all there. Cyrus, the little Syrian, and it's just remarkable. So it's really the totality. I mean, it's really an Athenian response, because at the end of the day, it was the Athenians, not the Spartans, not the Greeks, that defeated the Persians, not once but twice in their own territory, and virtually single-handedly. I mean, there were a few Plataeans, and there were a couple of Boeotians, but nothing much more than that. So it's really this, what you're showing us is really a very Athenian response to a very real adversary that they came to admire.
Yes. I have often wondered what the Persian Stoa at Sparta would have looked like.
It's a great reconstruction of the GRI, right? Joseph Tandy, what's his name? Tandy? Of the Persian Stoa. That's my favorite view. Fantastic.
But you're absolutely right, John. Well, I do not know whether it's in view of the fact that the vast majority of evidence we have is Athenian epigraphy, it's a democratic state, they put everything on inscriptions, and adequate figure of vase painting, okay, it's one of the few sources of ceramic production that actually can allow that kind of figural decoration, has expertise on the right kind of clay and all that kind of thing. This evidence is coming from one place, and I cannot have all confidence that it's only characteristic of Athens, that these ideas are only characteristic of Athens. I think they may be, but because of the Delian League and the imperial status. Yeah. But it changes in the 4th century, of course. Yeah.
Any more questions? One more, and if there is any. Good, I think we have exploited you sufficiently. But I would recommend making into an honorary Athenian as well. Thank you so much. It was lovely. Thank you.